Hello, good evening, welcome to our front. My guest today is a distinguished academic by all standards and qualifications. When it comes to international affairs, he is at the apogee. He is more relevant to the conversation because we all woke up to what was simmering tension, which many fear is escalating between Iran and the United States of America. Don't feel it's too far from you, and that's part of the conversation we're going to have today. Today, he'll break it down for us. He will appreciate why we should care in our part of the world, as is already stipulated elsewhere. Dr. Vladimir Chilaso, you're welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you are doing well, sir.
Very much well.
Now, it's somebody else's business. Right from 1953, when many believed that the US and the British orchestrated some form of replacement of the democratic leader of Iran. Yes. Then there was some protest, some what they call the Iranian Revolution,
yes,
which replaced this same leader. Yes. Then the return of the Ayatollah also became very monumental. Yes. To the 70s, where the remarkable incident of having to basically take hostage an entire embassy.
That's right.
The relationship has been a bit problematic, as it should be.
Yes. Well, good evening to your viewers too. The point is this, that the whole global system is now very unstable. And the instability is peaking at a time when one expects American leadership. But unfortunately, as you rightly started, the historical basis for our current instability has not been properly focused. If you go to any part of the world where there is instability, you see that there are remnants of unresolved historical, colonial, imperial issues. And so the Iranian one is not out of place. It's the same thing, yes. Before and especially during the Cold War, when people jockeyed for any of their socio-political formations to be accepted by the rest of the world, you would see that either the East or the West would help to put some government there, and then that government is overthrown, or there are changes, and then they begin to also jockey for positions. And that's what happened to Iran. The overthrow of the Shah epitomizes what I'm trying to narrate. And then that 79 revolution created a condition where international law was not obeyed. The American embassy was invaded, hostages taken. I mean, it's like an invasion of the country's territory, because the territory of an embassy is part of not the host nation, but the sending country. So American embassy is part of the territory of America. But that was done against international law. And Americans have never forgiven the Iranians. On and on and on, the tension between Iran and the US had gone very far, to the extent that a whole Iranian army has been labeled as a terrorist army. It's strange in the history of international relations to label an army as a terrorist organization. Once you label it this way, you have a right to be fighting it.
Not only because some believe that the Iranian state itself and its lead political actors sometimes do not only form but also fund some of these groups.
Well, we can, I'm not speaking for the Iranians, we can label them as such. We can say that it's a terrorist organization. We can say that the government itself is a terrorist government that is funding terrorism. Give me one country in the world, especially the big countries, which is not aiding any form of terrorist organization. The point is that the nomenclature, or whatever we call terrorism, has not gotten any acceptable definition. So, for example, in Syria, the Americans will be supporting some terrorist organizations against the other, right? People they are calling the Free Syrian Army, for example. Who are they? These are terrorist organizations that stood up against their government, and they are being sponsored by the US.
But I'm sure you would agree that sometimes conceptualization matters.
That's the thing.
Some groupings call themselves freedom fighters.
Exactly.
Between being a freedom fighter,
And
a
a
guerrilla
terrorist.
group, and a terrorist,
That's right.
finally,
That's right.
is dependent on sometimes the situation on the ground.
That is exactly what I was driving at. So what right has America to label another country as supporting a terrorist organization?
I see.
That's the point.
That's the truth.
And so the so-called freedom fighters were supported by America, to the extent that the YPG, which is another terrorist organization supported by America, but despised by Turkey, for example. So you see, to label a country or to label some country as supporting terrorism, I beg to differ, because openly, John Kerry, then Foreign Secretary for the US, openly gave Syrian rebels $100 million at a London forum to think about Syria. Openly. So what were they doing? Were they not supporting the terrorist organization? Then come to Libya. He, the same person, announced giving $60 million. You know that Gaddafi should be overthrown. What is it? So we may talk about this at another forum, but let me tell you, the question of terrorism is a dicey issue.
I agree.
But then terrorism is festering because of what we started this conversation with. That we believe that some organizations are being sponsored by another country. What about Israel, America itself? And so the Iranians will continue to hate those who sponsor people against them or who put them in that position. Huntington has described this as a clash of civilizations. What does he mean? When you want to foster your values on other people, there is resistance. And that's what is happening. In fact, Chomsky has derided America for saying that they missed the opportunities. 1945, they were the only power after the war.
Yeah.
But then they thought that was a Pax Americana. And so they went around the world trying to force their democracy. And if you see, one of the biggest pillars of American foreign policy is the spread of democracy and liberalism. And that is what is playing in the Middle East. Again, they lost the opportunity, as Chomsky will again say, after the demise of the Soviet Union and the implosion of communism. Then again, another. 3 books came out quickly. Fukuyama's End of History, McNamara's Out of the Cold, and then the third one was more devastating, and that was Joseph Nye's Bound to Lead. Who is bound to lead? So America feels it is bound to lead the world. And it is this leading the world that has led them to 17 different wars within the last 30 years, none of which they have won. But they've created problems for the whole world. One is Iran, where they think Iran has no right to behave the way they're behaving. And that is a dicey issue for international relations. Who calls the shots and why? And America wants to call the shots. Iran, you can't have nuclear weapons. You can't. We won't allow you. Then they go through the UN.
But the UN actually has resolutions on nuclear weapons.
That is my beef with the UN. Resolutions.
Yeah.
What did the UN do about Pakistan and India? When they went out of the treaty and started firing missiles, the UN has become impotent. So nobody respects the UN. It's unfortunate. It's the only institution we have which is good for mankind. But there you are. When it appears that the big powers don't have anything to say, India, Pakistan. India supported fully by Russia, and Pakistan supported fully by America. When they were misbehaving, who talked? And so we kept quiet. But Iran wants to have it. You can't have it because we fear you are going to use it in the Middle East against our allies, kind of. So there are a whole gamut of contentious issues where the morality of it is not being looked at.
Okay.
And I strongly suspect that Iran's behavior in the Middle East is precisely because of the geopolitics of the region, where Israel wants to be a master and where Iran is annoyed about the way Israel is treating the Palestinians and other Arabs, okay? And again, Turkey wants to also show off. Then Saudi Arabia is supported strongly by America in every dimension, you know? And Iran, predominantly Shiite, and Saudi Arabia, predominantly Sunni, the Alawites are ruling. If you want to understand the Middle East, the sectarian religious kind of mixture should also be a point. Iraq, predominantly Shiite. So one would have expected that Iraq and Iran would find accommodation. Together, Unfortunately, America supported minority Shiite to rule in Iraq putting Saddam Hussein there. When they didn't need him, they had to
remove them.
So all these things should be understood in terms of why Iran probably hates America and why America hates Iran. Because if America should support Iran, then it means that Saudi Arabia would not even also agree. And look at what is happening in Yemen. So we should understand it from this standpoint that the antagonism between these two countries is one of a historical nature, it's one of a clash of civilization, it's one of who is a terrorist and why do you treat Israel differently from me? Or why do you treat Saudi Arabia differently from me? And why do you want Saudi Arabia to be the champion in the Middle East and not me? This is the basis for the antagonism.
So that's the radical underpinnings to what's currently the situation.
Exactly.
But let's be clear. Something must have triggered the current problems. Because way back in 2013, between 2013 and 2016, it looked like they were headed somewhere. It looked like some agreements were being reached. For the first time, presidents on both sides spoke on phone.
Right.
For almost 30 years.
Yes, that's right. That Obama and
Yes.
Rouhani, yes.
So what happened?
I'll put the biggest blame on President Trump and his administration, or the type of administration. It looks as though President Trump has been following a certain trajectory of hatred for everything that President Obama did.
Okay.
Yes, the Iranian-U.S. debacle, whatever you call it, was coming to a close as both NATO countries and the U.S. supported a deal. And so that if the UN has placed sanctions on you, you may misbehave. If you place sanctions on China, they can do whatever they want. So let's meet them halfway because of most of the things that I've said. Yes, can we understand the Iranian from their point of view also, which was very good. And they got that deal, a deal which everybody supported, and, which really showed that things were coming closer. In fact, within the same period, there was a match between Iran and the U.S.
Yeah.
And Iran won. All in an attempt to bridge the gap,
Yes.
the animosity and whatnot and whatnot. But unfortunately, President Trump came and said, I'm out of the agreement.
Yeah.
2, I'm placing more sanctions on Iran. And 3, every move of the Iranians were sort of interpreted to mean Iran is a rogue state. Then came the question of the ISIS. ISIS was a fierce, devastating kind of force that took almost a third, if not more, of Iraq and was rampaging in Syria in an attempt to form a caliphate which runs from Iraq to the Levant, that is Lebanon. Now, Iran did a lot to make sure ISIS never set foot on its soil. I can speculate that if ISIS started from Iran and got a foothold in Iran, the US would have been happier under
Really?
President Trump. Yes. Because if your enemy's backyard is burning, you are happy.
But this is a bigger problem.
It's a bigger problem. So it is only when Iran was able to make sure that ISIS never got a foothold in Iran, and Iran got the opportunity now to support Iraq, which America was also supporting, that America got the fear that if they should leave, Iranian influence in Iraq and then in Syria would mean that geopolitically, America would have lost because its allies would have been put under a kind of threat,
Okay.
Israel and Saudi Arabia. And so what is happening now is a calculated attempt to make sure Iran's influence in the Middle East does not move further. It was going to move specifically because of Soleimani. Here is a dexterous, general.
It
Everybody,
seems to be important to the conversation.
yes, very important to the conversation. Here is a person under whose watch ISIS never dared Iran. Because of that, the cordiality between Iran and Iraq made it possible for him to come to Iraq and help Iraq fight ISIS. How? He formed the PMF. The PMF was so well trained and they were more devastating than the ISIS could offer that the Americans themselves decided to support the PMF. the Popular Movement Foundation.
Yeah.
So Americans were supporting Soleimani, were supporting the PMF, and they were more instrumental in getting ISIS out of Iraq.
That's an interesting dynamic.
Very interesting dynamic.
So this was a darling boy.
A darling boy.
When did he become the enemy?
He became the enemy, and, well, people might be annoyed with me when I say this, but truly, truly, American foreign policy is like a loose cannon on a deck. You can shoot anywhere. They did it to General Ziem in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
A general who was helping them left, right, center in order that,
Keeping the South
keeping
safe.
the South safe. When they didn't need him, they made a coup against him. And they were personally involved in the action to kill the man. They did it to Saddam Hussein. As I narrated earlier,
Right.
Saddam was their darling boy. They helped him to make a coup and to rule. They helped him to fight Iran for 80 years. Then they didn't need him no more. They did it to Osama bin Laden. They needed him to fight the Russians and the Mujahideen. And they got them out. Yes, they got the Russians out, toppled the Mujahideen. Now we don't need him. There are several ones like that. It looks as though Soleimani is no exception. They needed him, they finished with him. Now that we've announced that there is no ISIS and Americans have declared that they were going to leave, do you leave that terrain in the hands of Soleimani for him to form more PMFs around the area, close to Israel?
Going to different states and helping out.
Sure. Do you leave him to strengthen Hezbollah? Do you leave him to be able to strengthen the Iranian army so that one day they will say, Saudi Arabia, here we come. Yemen, we are there. No, look, the matrix was said that you got to get rid of this man before he takes over everything. So, unfortunately for him, Soleimani, his hatred for America was in him and he started babbling about it. Especially not for America per se, but specifically for President Obama. And he started babbling about that Americans are evil, President Trump is evil, he talks by heart, this is what he wants to do in the Middle East, we must resist. And this alone was a trigger.
Americans believe that there was an imminent strike on them from the Soleimani-led team. So they needed to protect the American state and interest.
Well,
legitimate?
Not legitimate.
Really?
We said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Very legitimate, isn't it? To strike.
Yeah.
Did we find them?
Not until today.
We said Gaddafi was preparing all kinds of things. And that he must be removed. And that we going in. If the UN is not even ready, we'll go in. When the UN gave the no-fly zone, we turned it into an attack against the UN resolution 1973. It didn't call for attack. But the NATO went in, led by America. The first bombings were direct flight, American planes, before France took over. So every time, give a dog a bad name and hang it. We've had it in history several times. And so they were alleging that this man was preparing an attack. And under Article 51 of the UN Charter, a preemptive strike is always acceptable under international law, isn't it? So they can claim that it was a preemptive strike, kind of. Yes, I mean, you give a dog a bad name and you hang it. So why would a man whom you were dining and wining with some few days
ago,
all of a sudden say, I'm going to attack you? It's subject to some kind of verification.
Now, the other claim that's actually been made also is that Iran indeed attacked the U.S. Its drone. Drone, U.S. said, was wandering in international waters and has not veered into Iran's territorial waters, and they had no business attacking it.
In international politics, we hear of these things often. The demarcations on international fronts and whatnot is very, very dicey. The international waters, airspace, whatever it is. Normally, when you ride into somebody's airspace, warnings are given.
Yeah.
The Tex shot a Russian plane which said it was on the border. It never veered. And if it veered at all, it was only for 17 seconds. which means that the people were already targeting it to shoot it down.
Yeah.
So these things are controversial issues in international politics all the time. What was a drone doing there? So, yes, Iran will continually, they had their drawings, I've seen it on the net, to show that this plane had veered deep into their territory.
Yeah.
Americans also have their version which shows that the drone never veered. Whom do we believe? It will continue to be a dicey issue in international politics. I don't know whom to believe. But naturally, when you veered into somebody's territory, in 1984, I believe, I think I was in Russia. I think it's 84. I stand for correction. A Korean plane veered into Russian territory in the Sakhalin area. And it has been marked clearly on every aviation map. You don't dare travel along that line. And the Russians shot it down. It was a passenger plane. But then the Russians were saying, you veered into my territory. And we were warning you to go off. You didn't go off. Finally, when the remnants of the plane were found, the Russians claimed that there were gadgets, that were supposedly spying on Russian missile points and whatnot, because that is where the Russians have a lot of their missiles. Okay. And they've declared that place a no-go area. The Russians shut it down. They shut it. So it happens. These things will continue to happen. If any civilian plane or whatever it is allows itself to be used as a range for spying, it will be shut down. And this is of no exception that a drone close to Iran, an enemy drone, come on. If it were America, they would do it.
I see. Now, the claim is that having to kill General Soleimani is an act of war.
Yeah.
It's an act of aggression.
Yes.
And mostly, when you declare and act in that way, states are minded to respond.
Right.
We saw some form of response.
Yes.
Some are indicating that that's not how Iran does their business. They don't play by the book.
That's right.
They actually believe in soft targets, which will actually impact you further.
Right.
When you look at the current scene, do we expect a further escalation of the situation?
Well, from the security point of view, you can interpret what is happening in several other ways. Soleimani's killing is an act of aggression, both against Iraq and Iran. He was killed on Iraqi soil, which means that you have started a certain proxy war. I mean, you are forcing Iran to attack Iraq.
Yeah.
Because he was the host of the... yes. And killing him there could have sparked some misunderstanding between Iraq and Iran. Probably, security-wise, America may have intentionally done that and expecting that. That didn't happen. On the other hand, Iraqis and Iranians are on one accord in this line. The second point is that then it calls for reaction. It's an act of aggression. So they are aggrieved. They want to retaliate, which Iran has vowed to do. Now, the attacks we are seeing, yes, the handwriting is such that that's not the way Iran does its things. But probably, again, in military terms, it can be a kind of diversionary tactic.
Okay.
To see what American reaction would be for the proper response. It could be. It could also be that it is not the government which is doing it, but enthusiastic kind of militia groups which have decided to just test the waters.
Okay.
It could also be that Iran does not necessarily want to hit the target properly for America to have another response.
Okay.
So America will now say that, oh, after all, they are unable to even have the correct targets.
They couldn't respond
properly. These can be camouflages. And I believe Iranian response in the fiercest way could be apocalyptic. That is, go hit American targets and their allied targets. Because if Iran is going to hit, they will hit all bases in Saudi Arabia, first and foremost.
Really?
Yes. Because that's the closest.
I see.
Turkey is now a little quiet. Other than that, they will hit the Turkish base. One of the biggest bases in Turkey. They will hit the base. Because that is the base you're going to use as a platform to attack me. So I will silence those places first. But that will be apocalyptic because American response will be swift. And Iranians or Iran will be devastated very, very seriously. And I do not think Iran is so stupid to go for that one. Now, why? In military terms, such apocalyptic wars, nobody wins. So what I strongly suspect they will do is to have a diffused kind of attack. Terrorism is going to fester them more. It's going to be cellular in nature, not hierarchical. Cellular in the sense that small bands will be formed who don't have to take a command from the center, who will be doing their own thing all around the world.
Targeting
American
installations.
Yes. I believe that is the more appropriate response they will do. The second response is in the new kind of warfare. And they will go all at length to be able to help them, whether it is China, they would go, Russia, they would go, especially enemies, perceived enemies of America, to help them in this new war. And that is the cyberspace. It is the most potent of all wars today. So the ICBMs you are talking about and the missiles and the nuclear, whatnot, they are devastating. But the most devastating today is the cyber warfare that we're having. In cyber warfare, all you need is to be very savvy with your cyber, specialization. And you can put a nation to sleep.
By just doing that.
By just doing that, without fighting. I think
without even being there.
We don't have to be there. You don't have to shoot. I think, you see, in military terms today, everybody is trying to go back to the master tactician of the 5th century, Sun Tzu. You say, take the enemy without a shot.
Oh, okay.
Take the enemy. If there is a possibility of making the enemy succumb, do it. For example, if you want to take a territory, you surround them, devastate all their farms and economy, and that's what they will succumb. And so now the cyberspace is such that by the use of the computer, you can make American banks impotent. That nothing goes. You can make an idiosyncratic way of you can't even know what is happening.
Bring the entire financial
system down, railway system down, whatever you can. Can you imagine a situation where all of a sudden you see that the national treasury of America, the monies have been sent to several people's accounts indiscriminately?
That's chaotic.
Very chaotic. A situation where the metering system in American water or electricity not working, railway system not working, railways banging each other underground and that kind of thing. Just a computer can do this. That is the new war front. And every day hacking is going on. America has now got to what we call the cyber squad or the cyber command, which is daily protecting America from this. Iran is doing it against America. America is doing it against Iran. Russia is doing it. China is doing it. This is the new war front. And I believe the Iranians have a strong capability
in doing this. They've proven it.
Yes, they've proven it.
But America can respond.
They can respond. But this kind of warfare, it's like playing chess.
Okay. I mean, it depends. It should be tactical, actually.
Exactly.
What you're saying suggests that, contrary to what people are putting out there, World War III won't happen.
World War III has started already. I know how I've made you panic. It has started.
I see.
And the signs are clear. Now, enemy fronts are not there. That we are not going to have a world war like the World War I, World War II. World War III has started already in all forms. Insecurity. People are now thinking of insecurity for the enemy.
Okay.
And that's what it has started. Just make it impossible for the enemy to survive. So either sanctions, either whatever it is that we are doing, it's a world war now. Retaliations and whatnot. For me, it's a world war. Because the type of war we thinking will happen the way World War I and II happened is just apocalyptic. If any war is done through ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or is done through nuclear, whatever it is, bombings and whatnot, nobody is going to survive the world. What will happen is that the world will turn into other forms. And it will take some years, a millennia, 1 million years before new species will come on Earth.
Can wipe everything clean.
Because things will be wiped out clean. Nobody can survive a world in which you have a war like the Second World War. Because the amount of plutonic substances that we have in nuclear warheads is enough to drown the world.
Powered up already.
Completely. each country has. Russia has, China has, France has, UK has, America has, what do you call it? Japan has, the Iraqi, and Iran. So it's like if anybody is trying to move, because interceptions of such this thing is not sacrosanct. We are not saying that each one of them can be intercepted.
Okay.
And safely too. Even if it is intercepted and it blows off somewhere, the repercussions for the world is great.
Mostly for conflicts of this sort, it's not the primary actors alone. There are sometimes third parties involved. On each side, who are the third parties?
Perhaps the only third party would have been the United Nations. Because irrespective of whatever we're doing, NATO and NATO countries are supporting America to the hilt.
Okay.
The Russians,
as always.
As always. The Russians, as a result, will naturally
oppose them.
Will oppose them, but will naturally not talk maybe, but then will support the other side.
I see.
Let this come up in the UN, you see what I'm saying coming true, because they will veto anything against Iran today. So will China. So we are having a situation in which, yes, as you were saying, it will happen that the world will now be seeing a situation where opposing factions, opposing forces will be heading against each other because there is no arbiter. The arbiter should have been the UN, but many countries don't have hope in the UN anymore.
Really?
Unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. I can't imagine Iran having hope in the UN that the UN will broker a proper peace. Because the nature of the UN is such that the bigger powers are killing the UN. If they don't have the UN under their ambit, they fight the UN. And US has done that a lot. Russia has done it. Vetoing here and there. Beyond the vetoing, what they have again is that they try to put the UN where it wants to be. So if it is Iraq, you remember, the UN didn't want to have what we saw in Iran. But unilateralism came in.
Okay,
and the UN as an arbiter was important. I can see a certain situation like this coming. If the UN wants to come in, there is a possibility that Iran will say, sorry, what did you do when the other did that? And that's what. So apparently we don't have no arbiter, but smaller countries can come together.
Okay.
The AU, other organized groups, right, could come together, the Commonwealth and whatnot, and put their mouth so strongly. I like the current UN secretary following the footsteps of Kofi Annan, always coming in, always talking against such unilateral actions. And I believe it is these things that may sober Iranian response, that may sober American response. I see another intervening kind of variable in the American people themselves. A lot of them are talking.
Is it because Trump is president?
Not necessarily, because look, Americans are a good loving people. But Washington, I'll refer you to one book. If you read it, you understand how Americans behave. It's called Washington Rules by Abasievich, a former general who wrote that book. The thinking of Washington is not the thinking of Americans.
I see.
The thinking of Washington is to satisfy the oligarchs, money. And money comes more from the military-industrial complexes than any other part of American production. And therefore, when it suits them, they will create the war and then profit from it. So I believe the American people have started talking. A lot of professors are coming out with their mind on it. And Congress is extremely angry. It happened during the past when they had the war something act. And now they want to even perfect that.
Okay.
That war act that enjoins the president to seek permission from Congress before he can declare war.
Okay.
Yes. And now Congress is thinking about that. So that Bush, even if he wants to retaliate when Iran has done anything untoward, would have to seek permission from Congress.
I'll come to the impact on the rest of the world. But the important statement from the Ayatollah, and the Ayatollah has religious relevance to Iran throughout. He's more sober, his words are soft, He's not the kind that has postured retaliatory attitude.
That's true.
Can we take him by that posturing?
That posture is very, very important to tame his own following.
Okay.
After such a tragedy. A head of an organization, a head of state like that, I mean, he's virtually the head of state, let's call it, or he's the spiritual leader. If you don't calm your people, they can override you, maybe take you off, and bring in a radical leader.
Okay.
For the prosecution of what they think will be a proper revenge and avenging of the death of Soleimani. So I believe he has played the greatest diplomat. That's what diplomats do.
Unlike him.
Unlike him. Exactly what I was going to say. Very much unlike him. Because if he had said in gesturing postures that we will avenge, and I urge you all, whatever you see, it would have taken a completely, if you saw the funeral. You should know that the whole of it, in fact, it was not an orchestrated thing.
Yeah.
It was not like the death of Kim Il-sung.
Okay.
Kim Il-sung. When he died, the stadium, and even the crying was orchestrated. This one is spontaneous. The spontaneity is seen in the people's anger, the people's response, the people coming together around and around. And I strongly suspect that if he had not taken this diplomatic line and had rather spoken in belligerent terms, would have seen a different kind of situation today. So he needed to calm them first. Whether he means that forever is another game.
That's what we explore, plus the real implications of this situation on also not only Africa, not the rest of the world, but also Ghana in particular. After this break, we'll continue with Dr. Vladimir Nchunanso. You welcome back. This is UPfront. My name is Raymond Alcom. My guest today is the learned Dr. Vladimir Nchunanso, and we're talking about the U.S.-Iran situation, which seems to be escalating by the second. We're seeking to understand, and if you've been part of the first half of this conversation, you would know the history to this particular conflict. You will know where we have come from so far, the parties involved in the conflict, those beyond the two states that we are dealing with, and the thinking of the leaders on both sides of this conflict. Now, we just tipped off a conversation as to whether or not the Ayatollah's current posture, which is more conciliatory, is it deliberate? Is it good for the conversation? Is it progressive? Does it mean Iran has no coordinated response, which will take months, may take years, but certainly will come? Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So that question is what I'm asking you. Can we take it that this is a changed man, and the changed man is looking at the way forward and saying, let's stay back? Or it's a ploy? It's a ruse that may be problematic?
It's difficult to say for now.
Okay.
But in international politics, you never say never.
I see.
Never. Times change, things change, the matrix change, and you got to take some action. But what he did was very, very prominent, was very good at the time. A good leader is one who knows when to act, what to say, when to say, to which people you have to say it, and at what time. And that's exactly what he did. He didn't want to raise the adrenaline in the people because they were so much angry to the hilt.
I see.
And that the best you could do is to calm them first, which he has done. Secondly, a good leader is one who doesn't act in a knee-jerk fashion. Have they taken stock of all that happened and why before they can retaliate? That's what you have to do. If there is any knee-jerk reaction, you may wound yourself. And so he has taken the best of steps for his people, for the region, and for the world. Now, it may happen that he may continue on that tangent, knowing very well the repercussions. It may happen. It may also happen that he may find another way of reconciliation or asking for reparation.
I see.
It may also be that he may find another way of punishing the aggressor more effectively. So the steps he has taken are the most appropriate steps today. rather than some belligerent posture that would have exacerbated the situation, which may not inure to the benefit neither of the country, the region, nor the world at large.
What should we expect to be the posture of the United States of America to the positioning of the Iranian leader now?
America will not relent in its posturing as a bigger threat.
Okay.
America will continue the deterrence posture. It's like, if you dare me, that's what will happen to you, kind of. And it's a natural posture. Okay. If they show any sign of weakness, it strengthens the opponent also.
I see.
So I'm not expecting America to move away from the deterrence position or deterrent posture, threat posture, kind of. The current defense secretary, the general, made it clear yesterday that they are prepared. They have men and women, and it's the greatest army in the world. This is a belligerent, deterrent posture. And I don't expect them to tame away from that.
But would they consider diplomatic talks?
American diplomacy is always a diplomacy of force. Americans don't go to negotiation with a win-win position. Never. If you study negotiations, one of the things you stumble upon is that American negotiation is for you to take ours or leave it, kind of.
I see.
And I'm not expecting America to come to a level unless they have leadership like the Obama leadership, which believe that the world as a globe must have a live and less live kind of situation. And that's why he wanted to really end all the Middle East crisis.
That's
He wanted to end Afghanistan. He wanted to end Guantanamo. But if you read Washington rules, you will really understand why he never achieved any of them. No. They showed him where America belongs, not where he wants to take America.
That's the question I want to ask now. This current situation, how does it impact the Middle East, for example?
The Middle East will continue to be a problem if the historical issues unresolved are not resolved. And some of them are unresolvable.
Really?
Yes. Historically, people have called it lines in the sand. The current structure of the Middle East was not like that. We used to have, for example, a country like Kurdistan, which is no longer there. From the Sykes-Picot Agreement, British, French agreement, they decided to draw lines. You are now called Jordan, you are now called Syria, you are now called, without respect to, just like ours in Africa, without respect to ethnicity, religious affiliation, and that kind of thing. And so the Kurdistan is dead. And the Kurds have been put in 4 different countries. In each country, they are oppressed and suppressed. They are in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, for example. And they are the troublemakers in almost all these countries also.
Established problematic
exactly,
people.
Problematic people. But it's not they are not just problem makers, but because of the history. That's number one. Number two, the Middle East structure in terms of religion, ethnicity, is problematic. The religion is so problematic because between the Shiites and the Sunnis, trouble. And Americans always want to see Sunnis wherever they are, and then they align themselves with them somehow. That's how they put Saddam Hussein there, because they believe it. But the Shiites, they don't like. And Saudi Arabia is head of the Sunni, whatever it is, especially the smaller group, the Alawites, are ruling in Saudi Arabia. If you align yourself with the Sunnis, then the Shiites will never like you.
They oppose you.
They will oppose. And Iran is predominant 90% or 95% Shiite. They will not like you. Come to Jordan and come to Bahrain. A minority Sunni is ruling. So when there was the revolution over there, they killed a lot of Shiites.
Yeah.
Shiite clerics are being killed in Saudi Arabia. Nobody is talking. So that alone is also problematic for the Middle East. The Hezbollah organization, the Palestinian question has not been resolved. So we are continually going to see this kind of problem in the Middle East, especially when other minorities are aligned to other big powers to suppress others. So the Middle East question is a huge question. Quite recently, one professor has proposed a realignment of the Middle East, a redrawing, pushing all Shiites to some
One
country.
side.
And but in modern times, it might be difficult. I think we should be able, if the UN were given the opportunity to play its role as given by the remit of the Charter, would have seen a situation where they would have been preaching live and let's live kind of position. But where continually Palestinian lands are being taken, continually they are being oppressed, continually one group is being played against the other, we'll continue to have this situation in the Middle East.
Africa.
Well, unfortunately, the lily pads and bases that Americans want, they are getting some in Africa.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem lies. There's one lily pad in Ghana, several of them in the Horn of Africa, and things like that. And so if terrorists feel that countries aligned to America one way or the other are being used against them, they will attack. What happened in Grand Bassam, for example, was not because they were attacking Ivory Coast. They were attacking people, they are attacking their enemies. They happen to be in Grand Bassam. So if tomorrow, God forbid, they are attacking West Hill Mall or any other place where they think Americans or Westerners, patronize, then it's not because they are attacking Ghana, but because they are pursuing their enemies. And I strongly believe that this is what Ghana should fear. We need to now mainstream terrorism in our schools, in our daily life, in our communities, in our discourses, in our churches, for us to understand terrorism. Unfortunately, the conception is that terrorism belongs to a certain group of people.
Yeah.
They are uneducated bastards. They belong to Islam, and Islam is terrorism. That's a misconception. That's a big, big, big misconception. They are very well educated. They make their own bombs.
Yeah.
Other than that, a graduate from the UK and UST would not leave Ghana to go and fight on the desert over there. And several of them left. I know you know, as a matter of fact, that our security agencies are doing very well. The interception of the 3 girls, Ghanaian girls who were leaving to go and be married to ISIS, they should tell us that, look, indoctrination and radicalization is still ongoing. And if we understand terrorism, then even though the UN has all these 4 pillars counter-terrorism strategy, we can have our own indigenous strategy by de-radicalizing people, taking them out of their mind that anybody can be a terrorist.
I see.
We need to do that. Other than that, the effect on Ghana would be the cellular nature of what I mentioned about terrorism. People are now going to go in squads and attack Americans and the Westerners anywhere they can attack them.
And they may have some overflows into other
areas. Of
areas.
course, collateral damage would always come. Collateral damage would always come.
We are not safe, are we?
No, absolutely. No part of the world is safe from terrorists. Even the bigger countries themselves know this. China, Russia, they've mentioned it.
Do we have the capacity to deal with it?
You see, anybody, at times people talk to, we do have the capacity, our soldiers, we must beef the military up. No, you don't need numbers to overthrow terrorism. No.
And this case, capacity is beyond numbers, right?
It's beyond the numbers. Beyond the numbers, you really need, today, artificial intelligence is the order of the day.
Forward, yeah.
De-radicalization through education, through mainstreaming terrorism. See, terrorism is now a hidden kind of phenomenon. People, you hear the word terrorism and people are afraid. No, we should look at terrorism like, look, there is terrorism everywhere. And when you make the people illiterate about terrorism, and I tell you the churches are the biggest problem in Ghana, where knowing this is, because they are making people not know their world around them.
I see.
Everything is God. Everything is miracles. Please, can we turn those miracles into making the people conscious about their surrounding?
So they are prepared.
So they are prepared.
And will know what to do.
I followed a friend to a certain church. I won't mention it. I looked at the security in the area and I laughed. I look at how people, it's like they want the band, they want the shouting, they want to praise the pastor, and they are believing in miracles. when they say they are praying, the prayer is said that they are shouting on God for God to give them what they want. And I laughed. It is easier for a terrorist to go and put a bomb in that church very easily. Very easily. And I think most of the churches in Ghana are like that. How many of our churches preach something about terrorism? How many of them are making their members aware of terrorism and the reason for terrorism? How many? Every day is miracle.
Even the media.
Even the media.
It's not been a very wonderful topic to have every day.
Absolutely. And I sit down here and I wonder. Something happens and then the government rushes. Oh, we are putting measures in place. I remember
having emergency.
Exactly. I remember my very good friend Baba Kamara when he was a government advisor, and the Grand Bassam came, and his speech. I called him later and I laughed at him. How they were going to place this in at hotels, and I laughed. No, there must be proper indication of the country being aware of terrorism. Why and how terrorism? Why is it festering? Who is a terrorist? It could be you.
Okay.
It could be you, a journalist. You going somewhere. Do you know that one Christian was arrested in Nigeria who didn't know that he was being used by the terrorists? He's a vendor, newspaper vendor. And every time these terrorists come, they buy a lot. I mean, you spend a whole day selling 20. And if they come in, they buy 100 every day for you. And then they send you, go and put this thing here, go and put this thing here. They are your friends.
To do that, yes.
And then one day they give you a parcel. Oh, some Alaji is at the car park over there. Meet him with this thing. If it's not there, there's a kiosk over there. Just place it there. You will do it. So these things are the awareness we don't have.
Conscientizing people.
Conscientizing people.
It's important now.
Very important. It is the biggest weapon. Among the 4 pillars that the UN is talking about, I wrote an article condemning a lot of them. You're talking about human rights. That when there is a human rights and the rule of law, terrorism will go away. That's very true. But terrorism uses non-human rights. And our chasing of terrorism is also using... If Soleimani is a terrorist, what action did we take against Soleimani? Is it not a terrorist act?
That's an interesting development there.
So, we need to make people really aware of terrorism. Not to be afraid of terrorism, but to know terrorism. See terrorism when they see one.
Can the situation de-escalate?
In the Middle East?
Yes.
Yes, why not? Why not?
Would it de-escalate?
Not now. The tension will rise until something else takes its place.
Oh, I see.
Until something else, bigger, maybe, let us assume that North Korea pops up again. Then you see the tension over here may be reducing a little. And that sort of thing. Or let's see that some other gestures from America or some gesture from Iran. But until these things happen, until something else, very important.
On whose side is Ghana? That's an important
question.
Ghana
cannot and should not be on any other person's side. They must be on the side.
Iran belongs to the non-aligned movement.
That's true.
We are still members of the non-aligned movement.
That's true.
We've had long ties with the United States of America.
Exactly.
Too. So on whose side are we?
Ghana cannot and should not. One of the main pillars of Ghana's foreign policy is multilateralism. There are 4 main pillars of Ghana's foreign policy. Pan-Africanism, good neighborliness, non-alignment, and multilateralism. Multilateralism means that we will go with the multilateral organization we belong to. And the main multilateral organization, which is for peace in the world, which helps us to understand our non-alignment and everything, is the United Nations.
Okay.
So Ghana should go with what the United Nations would say and should vote accordingly where the United Nations want us to go. But to say that I'm supporting America because they are my friends, they give you money, you open yourself to terrorist attack. To side with the Iranians, sanctions can be placed on you by the Americans.
That's an interesting middle line that you may struggle to belong to anyway.
Yeah. So I believe if Ghana goes with the peacemakers, Iran, please calm tempers, even though it's a bad thing. Everybody is condemning it. We think that if you don't retaliate, let's see how we can judge. Or that's what Ghana should say. Tell Americans also that don't escalate issues anymore.
Okay.
You tell the Americans, we are your friends. By this time, our foreign affairs must have been working. Call the American ambassadors. Ghana's position is this. We have to. I mean, it's done in international politics.
Are we not seen as a small group in any way?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You do it every time, but they won't tell you in the media. They won't tell me. But Ghana's government, if they think that something untoward is happening, they can call the UN representative over here and say, look, we believe that something is happening which is not good. We want the UN to go in this way. Alternatively, they can call the Iranian ambassador over here and say, look, what we are expecting is a situation where you don't escalate. So they will send it to their government. That Ghana is telling us not to. Most countries must have done that already. If we haven't done it, we can do it. And I know they do it. Our president can take the telephone right now. Mr. Trump, you know you are my friend. Come on. I mean, what is this? You killed him already. But please, can you tone down? You haven't done anything against the world. You take again, and Rouhani, you know, please, for heaven's sake, don't escalate them more. I mean, we are a small country, but we believe if you escalate your people, think about your people. This is normally done in international relations. Quiet diplomacy.
Doc, I guess we can end here. Have a different conversation going forward about whether the people would de-escalate the situation or it will get worse, and what the alternatives are for countries like Ghana. Well, folks, that's where we end today's edition of UPfront. Many thanks to you for joining us. I hope you have a better appreciation of the issues coming into this conversation.